So he pressured a foreign leader to involve himself. This would be Zelensky of Ukraine in our 2020 election. He invited Russia to intervene in our 2016 election, and they took him up on the invitation. He being, of course, Donald Trump. He undermined, he revealed a U.S. asset. I mean, if Obama had done just that, they wouldn't have just impeached him. They would have convicted him for high crimes, for treason. Burning a foreign spy who was, you know, had infiltrated ISIS. He hired a national security advisor. This would be Michael Flynn, who also worked as a lobbyist for a foreign country, specifically Turkey. And then Flynn, as national security advisor, starts promoting pro-Turkey positions. He encourages foreign leaders to stay in his hotels. N.M. Gaucho put together a great list of this stuff over at DU last Friday. You've got the Saudis now, Trump bragging that the Saudis have bought the entire 45th floor of Trump Tower. They spent a couple $100,000, you know, basically buying up an entire wing of the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., not buying it, but, you know, renting it. His first foreign trip is to Saudi Arabia, a country where women can't drive, can't own property, can't, you know, have basically no rights, and anybody who is not a male Saudi Muslim, Sunni Muslim, you know, literally has no rights. I mean, it's one of the most repressive dictatorships on earth. He has burned our allies. Look at what he's done to Europe. You know, the Iran deal is a great example of that. He lied to the American people throughout the election process, throughout the primary as he was trying to become the Republican nominee. I've got no business dealings in Russia. At the same time that Michael Cohen was signing letters of agreement with Russia to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. And by the way, it's not just Russia. He's got Trump Towers all over the world, in some of the Stan countries, and I believe in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Turkey, in Panama. The one in Panama has been, you know, is the hub of money laundering activity, or at least it was. He did not divest himself from any of these things. You know, Jimmy Carter, you know, when Jimmy Carter became president, he put his peanut farm in a blind trust, hired a guy to run the trust, and then didn't have a conversation with the guy for all the 4 years he was in the White House. He actually lost a chunk of his farm because the price of peanuts went down while he was president. The guy didn't really know how to run the business. Jimmy Carter was hurt by this. Donald Trump is getting rich off being president. He lies literally every day. He's running a television ad right now, a $10 million ad buy, that starts with a lie that Joe Biden bragged about firing a prosecutor who is investigating his son. The prosecutor was not investigating his son. Joe Biden fired him, or lobbied to have him fired, on behalf of NATO, on behalf of the European Union, on behalf of President Obama, because that particular prosecutor was just insanely corrupt. And by the way, it gets even weirder with that particular prosecutor. That particular prosecutor, the corrupt prosecutor, his name is Victor Shokin. So the fired prosecutor, the corrupt prosecutor, Shokin, has just sworn out an affidavit saying that Biden got him fired in order to protect Biden's son, Hunter. Now, you would expect this from a corrupt former official. But he did this on behalf of a Russian billionaire, or Ukrainian billionaire, excuse me, by the name of Dmitry Firtash, who was Paul Manafort's business partner. So just follow this for a second. Paul Manafort's business partner, Paul Manafort's business partner, Ukrainian billionaire, goes to the fired corrupt prosecutor and says, give me a statement that you were fired because of Joe Biden's son. The guy gives him the statement. And then he hands it off to, drum roll, according to Let's see, where did this come from? TPM, Talking Points memo. Then he hands it off to DeGeneva and Tensig, who are two Fox News commentators who are lawyers, who Donald Trump once tried to hire in the White House, but they couldn't come over and help him out because of conflict of interest and all kinds of weird stuff. And by the way, this Ukrainian billionaire, he's in Austria right now, fighting extradition to the United States for bribery charges. So now the Fox News commentators have got the affidavit from the corrupt prosecutor in Ukraine saying, "Yep, Biden tried to get me fired." I mean, this is Manafort, Giuliani, and I mean, it's just it's exploding right in front of our eyes. And this story that it's really all about Joe Biden's son being corrupt and Joe Biden facilitating that and trying to fire the guy who was trying to clean up Ukraine. That story is going to be amplified so much over the next 5 days on right-wing hate radio and on Fox so-called news that it is going to become God's accepted truth by all the people who have been suckered by Donald Trump. This is interesting. Newsweek has just published this piece suggesting that Donald Trump may resign if he gets a Nixon-like immunity agreement so that he can keep his money and his kids don't go to jail. Alan J. Steinberg, who served, this is from Newsweek, Alan J. Steinberg, who served as an advisor to former President George W. Bush, wrote in an opinion piece published this week that he didn't believe President Donald Trump would be removed from office through impeachment. This guy was a former EPA regional administrator. He believes Trump is going to resign this year in exchange for immunity. He wrote this in the Star Ledger. The self-professed supreme dealmaker will use his presidency as a bargaining chip with federal and state authorities in 2019, agreeing to leave office in exchange for the relevant authorities not pursuing criminal charges against him, his children, or the Trump organization. There's only 2 years left in his presidential term. Actually, it's a little less than a year and a half. And with his approval ratings abysmal, forthcoming recession, no chance that he's going to get reelected. And now, as I mentioned earlier, as I opened the show, we have 2 newspapers now that have publicly called for Trump to resign. So what do you think? Okay, I was going through the list of the things that this guy has done. He doesn't read briefing books. He doesn't do his job. I mean, just the basic do your job, sir stuff. That's not getting done. He describes white supremacists as very fine people. He told 4 women of color, all citizens, all members of Congress, to go back to the crime-infested places from which they came. He used the word Pocahontas, telling a joke to a group of Native American World War II vets. This is just, he launched his political career by lying about Barack Obama not being a U.S. citizen. He launched his presidential campaign by referring to Mexicans, people of Mexican ancestry, as rapists. He has variously described women in politics and the media as being dogs, pigs, horse face, bleeding badly from a facelift, and having blood coming out of her whatever. He's encouraged his supporters to commit violence against his political opponents. He's called for his opponents and critics to be investigated and jailed, and boy, that one is getting huge right now. The State Department, right after Trump became president, the State Department sent out notices to a bunch of people who appear in Hillary Clinton's emails saying, we're looking into this further. And then it kind of went away. But then in August, right after this phone call well, a few weeks after, this phone call with Zelensky, with the president of Ukraine. The State Department has now gone back and said to a whole bunch of people who sent emails to Hillary Clinton in the normal course of their jobs, right? People working in the State Department, people working in other branches of government. Many of them weren't actually even to Clinton. They were to people who worked for Clinton, and they forwarded them to Clinton. And so they ended up on Clinton's email server. The State Department has gone back and said, these, you'll recall, James Comey said, we looked into this stuff, and none of the stuff that was on Hillary's server was classified. There was like one document on there that had a C on it, but it had been declassified, so no problem. So the State Department, apparently in the last month or so, has gone back and retroactively classified a whole bunch of these emails that appeared on Hillary Clinton's server. And now they're going after the people who sent them, saying, you may have committed a crime. We're investigating this because you sent classified information to an unclassified server. Now, really, the subtext to all this is Hillary Clinton committed a crime by having classified information on her server. The Washington Post just broke this story over the weekend. So they're going back to the previous administration. They're trying to dirty Hillary up again. Why? Because, hey, it works in Trump world. So he's called on for his opponents and his critics to be investigated and jailed. He uses this phrase that literally Stalin and Hitler and Pol Pot and Kim Jong-un used to describe the media, quote, enemy of the people. He's harassed the Federal Reserve. He said that a judge couldn't be objective because his parents or grandparents were from Mexico. He broke campaign finance law by telling his lawyer, Michael Cohen, to send $280,000 in hush money to two women with whom he had affairs. By the way, Michael Cohen is sitting in jail for this. Trump is an unindicted co-conspirator. There's an extraordinary amount of evidence that the reason why Donald Trump has any money at all is because he's committed widespread financial fraud. The New York Times laid out how he and his sister, who stepped down from being a federal judge to block the investigation, he and his sister committed widespread tax fraud in order to smuggle more money out of his father's estate. All the while saying he was a self-made man when he took over $400 million from Daddy. He lied to his people on that too. And yet these poor suckers, I mean, you just have to feel sorry for these people. He claimed that federal law enforcement officers and federal prosecutors, U.S. prosecutors, were routinely fabricating evidence, which does a whole lot for our confidence in our criminal justice system, right? Well, of course, mob bosses are always claiming that the criminal justice system is corrupt, the cops are corrupt, the courts are corrupt, because they're corrupt. This is what mob bosses do. He has ordered children to be physically separated from their parents and put in cages. And he tried to argue in court last week that he had the ability to do this to keep these children indefinitely. Thank God the court said, no, you can't do it indefinitely, but he's still doing it. He called our country, the United States of America, a hellhole. And some of you don't think he should be impeached or that he should resign. And now he's going after Medicare. He's going to do this today, he says.